So, I'm Abdullah. I recently graduated from Indus Valley School of Arts and Architecture, and I majored in interaction design. And for that very program, this was essentially my final thesis project. I actually joined IVS with the hopes of doing textile design, but then later on I switched to communication design, and that all happened by chance, despite the fact that I had sciences in my A levels. And this transition from one topic to another has a lot to do with the topic of this presentation, which is career guidance, which we don't really have much in Pakistan. So the problem essentially that I was trying to tackle was career guidance in Pakistan, specifically for inter students. That is because many of these inter students end up enrolling in programs or later on in jobs that does not really align with their interests. And what that leads to is them, basically affecting their well-being and also affecting the nation's economic growth. So to better understand this, how this thing gets here is by the fact that these individuals don't really have a sense of direction in what they want to do in their careers, and this leads them to being disengaged in their educations. And 40% of these individuals are disengaged from their educations, which in the end results in them basically enrolling in programs that aren't really in line with their interests, which later on, it's a cycle, it's a dominoes effect, results in them not performing well at the job, which results in essentially a very poor human capital productivity of the country, which also affects the economy again. So the goal of this project was essentially to make sure and to basically empower these college students to make better career decisions for themselves. So I conducted a lot of research, and during that research, I went everywhere I could find this target audience, be it outside of schools, inside schools, a lot of the time outside of coaching centers, inside coaching centers, and I was very surprised to find most of them in Facebook groups. And these Facebook groups essentially served as a safe haven for these individuals where they could talk about their problems, things that they needed help with, if they didn't get good percentages in their exams, so they seeked advice, if I got 70%, which universities can I go to? And I essentially ended up categorizing my insights into 3 sections. So the first is issues with researching. So researching about universities, what universities are there, what programs do they offer, what are the requirements of those programs, and such and such. And the key issues that they faced here was primarily the fact that universities did not have their websites updated. So what they ended up relying upon was word of mouth. And with word of mouth, something that was very interesting was that they either relied on the parents, which usually led in them just pushing engineering, medical, or artificial computer science onto their students. And with peers, it was essentially like, with peers, we can also come to the social pressure wall aspect. And over here, what was happening was that there were these friend circles, and in those friend circles, there was always that one individual, which was a persona in my research, which was someone who was very influential. And these individuals would have things generally figured out, which was primarily because of the parental pressure. And because they had things figured out, they would end up leading the others in the group. So they would say something like, oh, mujhe pata hai, mujhe computer science karna hai from this university. And the others would follow in their footsteps. Ki, oh, agar mujhe nahi pata kya karna, to main bhi wahi kar lunga. And this isn't something really bad, because we did end up taking leverage of this social phenomena in the platform. And we'll talk about that later. And the third issue that I identified was lack of guidance. Like, there was none. There was no formal entity in campuses or anywhere really. The guidance parents provided was primarily all from the limited perspective they had, and that isn't really their fault either. That those were the things that they heard of the most, and it's essentially a cycle of sorts. So what ended up happening was this categorization led to 3 verticals in this platform, and each vertical caters to their respected problems that were identified previously. So with the research problems, there was learn and explore, a vertical that we introduced, and this was essentially providing a curated library of information about universities, what programs do they offer, what other universities offer that program, and as well as what are the requirements for these programs. And moving on, there was the forum aspect, which is catering to the social problems. And over here, like we discussed previously about the friend circle and the friend groups wallet dynamic, what's happening here is that basically what was initially happening that those groups existed in silos, and what's happening now is that we're trying to expose them to a more diverse peer network. And by doing so, this time we'll make sure that instead of just getting one view about from a friend that computer science karna hai, they could get views from other individuals who might have different views about different programs. And at the very least, they will be more aware of all the options they have. Then there was mentorship. So mentorship is essentially, it's mentorship. So what you could do is that you could book mentorship sessions with seniors in the industry, and you could seek their guidance. So what's happening here is that from the first vertical on the left, they learn and explore and see all the programs there are out there. And then on the forum, they discuss about those programs. And then later on, moving on to the mentorships, once they figured out all the programs there are, they can seek advice from a mentor to make that final decision. So before we move on to the actual platform, there are a few frameworks that were adopted, and these frameworks are used by a lot of guidance counselors across the globe. So the first framework is called the FIRST framework. F is essentially for focus, and then there's information, realism, scope, and tactics. So a guidance counselor would ask the student in front of them about their focus. What are they interested in? And then after that, they would ask them, what type of information do you have about it? How realistic is it? What are the scope? And what tactics have they followed or should help them? And then moving on to the second framework, which is skill, interest, values framework. These are essentially a series of questions regarding skills, interest, and values. And this helps the student identify what skills, interests, or values they might have. And these skill, interest, values essentially serves as a very core data collection point for this platform, because using the answers we would get based on these questions, we could better push them to a domain area based on these skills and interests. So if, let's say, the skills that they identified were very close to the creative space, we could push them towards design and arts, where they could explore different programs ranging from interaction design, media design, or even to textile design. So yeah, this is the product, Pechan. And so to better understand the product or this project, there are essentially three key verticals. And for those three key verticals, there are feature flow scenarios. The first is explore and learn, which had to do with the research problem. And over here, we can see that this individual will try and look for something in this platform and research upon a university program. However, we also had to make sure that these individuals are new here. So we had to make sure that they were aware that we were always there. So we've placed a CTA near the search area. So if by any chance they don't know what they're looking for, they could just go there. And once they do, they will be prompted with a series of questions. And these questions are based on the previously discussed SIV and the first model. And it will help them narrow down to some extent. And it will essentially give them a starting point for their exploration. I'll just let this finish. Something's cooking. Yeah, so here you can see that it moved on, but it did recommend them something. So moving on. So moving on to the second key feature flow scenario is basically the forum. So while yes, the goal for the forum is to ensure that these individuals are exposed to a more diverse peer network, it also serves as a place where it's basically mimicking what they did on Facebook groups, so they could ask for help. They could go to the specific program of interaction design and ask for help in the admission process. So over here, he's going to ask for help in applying for IVS because they didn't understand the brief. And yeah, so moving on to the third vertical, which is mentorship. Over here, the individual could basically browse mentors based on subjects. We do not expect them to know these individuals by name, so we have the ability to browse by categories or subjects, and they could book a mentorship session with them, which will prompt them to having that session with them. But essentially what's happening over here, what's really important is that this really tied all the three verticals together. While we have made the mentorship sessions free for them, for a month it's like 2 free sessions, the other two verticals have been gamified. So the more you explore and learn, and the more active you are in the forum to help others out, the more coins you will earn. And you will essentially use those coins to book more mentorship sessions. So conclusion, while this is something that caters to a very small niche, given that majority of the individuals that graduate from colleges don't really have the privilege to attend universities, it still leaves a question that needs to be asked, that what can we do for vocational training or individuals who go that route. So yeah, that's it.